10 shocking inequalities Black people street ill face in America. Do you think the American dream is for everyone? Many people believe it is, until they realize some doors don't open with hard work, but with skin color and birthplace. Countless Black immigrants come to the U.S. carrying hope for a better life, only to run into a quiet but ruthless reality. They're held longer, scrutinized harder, and denied faster even when walking the same path as everyone else. No one says, "You don't belong here," outright, but they feel it when they're forced to prove they're not criminals, when paperwork gets delayed without reason, or when rejection comes wrapped in a polite smile. It's the kind of exhaustion that never makes the headlines, but shows up in restless sleep and the constant tension of being watched. In this video, we're going to uncover 10 signs that the American dream is quietly cracking, not with loud explosions, but through slow, persistent fractures. From being detained for weeks simply for lacking a lawyer, to losing asylum because of a biased glance, or working 60 hours a week and still struggling to survive, these aren't isolated incidents. They're evidence that the dream is becoming more selective, deciding who gets to move forward and who gets left behind. And if you think this doesn't concern you, stay with us. Because when a shared dream starts to collapse in one corner, the shockwaves eventually reach everyone still holding on to it. 1. The massive wealth gap. Some gaps can't be seen with the naked eye. They don't lie at the starting line, but in the slope of the race itself. People still call America the land of opportunity, where anyone can rise if they just work hard enough. But when the average white family holds nearly $300,000 in assets, while a Black immigrant household barely reaches $60,000, the question isn't who's trying harder, but why the finish line is tilted so steeply in the first place. Many Black Americans have shared that building wealth in America isn't just about effort, it's about permission. And for generations, that permission was simply never granted to them. This gap isn't some accident of fate. It's the long residue of historical choices, starting from the moment Black labor was treated not as human, but as capital. In 1860, enslaved Black Americans generated nearly half the value of U.S. exports. But when freedom finally came, they were given nothing but empty hands and a forgotten promise: 40 acres and a mule. Some economists estimate that the value of wealth stolen from the Black community since then adds up to $14 trillion today, a number you won't see on a receipt, but it shows up in every credit score. Even after the chains were broken, Black immigrants stepped into a country where the rules had already been written against them, redlining those invisible lines drawn on maps to label Black neighborhoods as high risk, locked them out of homeownership, the primary engine of wealth in America. While white families built equity, Black families were denied access. To this day, former redlined areas still see home values up to 70% lower, with tighter lending and fewer resources. The dream of ownership was suffocated before it could even begin. Even policies that were meant to be fair, like the GI Bill for veterans, left deep scars. Many Black veterans were denied housing assistance simply because their neighborhoods fell inside those redline zones. That meant an entire generation missed out on wealth building, and their children had to start from below zero. In America, inheritance isn't just money, it's momentum. White families are far more likely to receive nearly $200,000 in inheritance, while many Black families inherit debt. Even when incomes are the same, the asset gap doesn't shrink, because that gap isn't just in the wallet, it's in the system itself. The reality is this: Black households own only 3.4% of America's total family wealth, despite making up over 11% of the population. Between 2019 and 2022, the gap actually widened by nearly $50,000. Not because people stopped working, but because the system kept rewarding those who already had and punishing those who'd already lost. This isn't just an economic injustice, it's the basement beneath every other inequality. Without wealth, people lose homes, lose health, lose access to education. And when opportunity keeps landing in someone else's hands, while yours are stuck holding nothing but bills, the American dream starts to feel like a shadow, distant, fading, and no longer meant for everyone. 2. Much lower home ownership rates. Some doors may look open, but their hinges have been rusted shut for generations. They say owning a home is the first step toward the American dream. But for many Black immigrants, that dream doesn't begin with a key. It begins with a stack of unanswered questions, like why does the same income earn different outcomes when it comes to getting approved for a loan? The numbers are hard to ignore. White homeownership rates hover around 73 to 74%, while black homeownership lingers at 43 to 46. That's a gap of nearly 30 points, not a statistical fluke, but a generational delay in access to stability. Many black applicants share that even with steady jobs, strong credit histories, and clear financial plans, they still feel like they're being judged by an unspoken standard, one that no one names, but everyone senses. It's not uncommon for mortgage applications to be denied without clear reasons, only vague phrases like, "We're revising our lending criteria." But criteria evolve while racial identity remains. The shadow of redlining, the policy that once drew literal red lines through black neighborhoods, has long been outlawed, but its imprint is still fresh on today's housing reality. Formerly redlined areas still suffer from home values up to 50% lower and home ownership rates 10 to 20 points below neighboring zones. So even when black families manage to buy a home, they're locked out of the wealth-building potential that real estate was supposed to provide. While white families build equity, many black families are stuck in the renting loop. Rent payments feed someone else's wealth, not their own. And when 30% of your income goes just to keep a roof over your head, there's not much left to invest in a future. Renting isn't the issue until it becomes a sentence, not a choice. Then, it turns into a quiet kind of poverty, one that doesn't scream but slowly strips away freedom. History doesn't just live in textbooks. It lives in how neighborhoods are zoned, in the fine print of loan agreements, in higher interest rates that no one can quite explain. These barriers no longer wear official labels, but they show up in suspicious looks, in mortgage ads that never target you, and in insurance forms that quietly say, "Not eligible." For many black families, the median home equity is just $44,900, barely 1/6 of that held by white families. And when home equity makes up 60 to 70% of middle-class net worth, that difference isn't just about property. It's about access to education, financial breathing room, and the right to rest without risking poverty. There have been proposals, down payment assistance, tighter anti-discrimination laws. But unless the system that keeps reproducing this housing inequality is addressed at its roots, any fix will be like building a house on ground already cracked from beneath. 3. Lower median income. Some numbers look like plain statistics until you place them in real life, and they begin to draw invisible lines between who's allowed to breathe easily and who's forced to tighten their belt every day. Income isn't just about paychecks. It's about the quiet right to exhale without fear of not making rent. But for many black immigrants, that ease has always felt like someone else's privilege. The reality is, median household income for black families sits around $53,000 to $56,000, 30 to 40% lower than the $80,000 to $85,000 median for white families. That gap doesn't come from ability. It's shaped by layers of unseen filters, already deciding who gets paid what for doing the same job. Many black workers report earning 20 to 30% less than white colleagues in identical roles, with equal hours and credentials. For black women, this gap compounds into billions of dollars every year, money that was never funneled their way, despite being rightfully earned. Resume audits have shown that simply having a name that sounds black can lower callback rates dramatically. And if someone does make it through the door, the ladder upward is often blocked by silent ceilings no one admits exist. Occupational segregation is the modern echo of older divides. In the early 1900s, nearly 90% of black labor was confined to agriculture. Today, the uniform may have changed, but the concentration persists. Black workers are disproportionately found in low-wage sectors like caregiving, retail, and manual labor roles with high turnover and limited mobility. Meanwhile, in high-paying fields like tech or finance, black representation remains strikingly low. Those who do break through often describe hitting a kind of invisible ceiling unseen, but felt with every missed promotion or cold shoulder in the boardroom. Part of the problem lies in how opportunities circulate. It's not just about resumes, it's about who gets invited to the table before the job is even posted. Most high-quality jobs come through personal referrals, but when black professionals are kept outside those informal networks, They're left to rely on official job boards where the odds are colder and the playing field steeper. Education was once believed to be the ticket out, but in many Black communities, that ticket is printed on thinner paper. Public schools in these neighborhoods are often underfunded, overcrowded, and under-resourced. And even when Black students beat the odds and earn their degrees, they're often steered into fields with lower pay or excluded from elite circles where those degrees are supposed to matter most. The result? Education helps, but it doesn't level the field. If we only looked at income disparity on a spreadsheet, it might pass as a statistical inconvenience. But for many Black immigrants, it's a living truth. They work harder, earn less, and are constantly asked to prove their worth from below zero. And when a society ties a person's value to their salary, what's stolen isn't just money. It's the silent affirmation that says, "You matter just as you are," and not only when someone finally decides you're worth the raise. 4. Heavier student loan debt. Some diplomas don't open doors. They just sit heavier on your shoulders year after year, not as a promise, but as a lifelong burden. People still say education is the way out of poverty, a launchpad to a better future. But for many Black immigrants, a college degree doesn't unlock freedom. It marks the beginning of debt with no clear end in sight. Many in the community say they entered college not with family wealth in their pocket, but with high-interest loans stacked in their name. When the median wealth of Black households barely crosses $24,000 and tuition keeps rising, getting a degree feels less like an opportunity and more like a gamble. Meanwhile, in many white families, education is supported by generational wealth, a quiet financial lift from parents or grandparents that makes all the difference, even if no one talks about it. It's not uncommon for Black students to borrow more, take longer to repay, and still never escape the debt. In some cases, the loan balance grows after graduation instead of shrinking. Starting salaries are often low, and family support is minimal, so monthly payments barely cover the interest. The debt doesn't disappear, it just lingers, decade after decade, like a shadow that won't move. Many Black borrowers describe feeling trapped in a game that was never designed to be fair. Same degree, same job title, but the paycheck doesn't match. Black women, for example, often carry an average student debt near $38,000, while their white peers, earning more, carry less. Debt doesn't just delay financial goals, it steals the ability to breathe easy, even once the job is secured. And the pressure grows when families can't step in to help. While only about 7% of Americans borrow money for someone else's education, the number is much higher in Black families. Around 86% of Black students rely on loans, compared to 68% of white students. And once that loan agreement is signed, it's not just one person carrying the weight. It's an entire family, sometimes an entire generation, quietly tethered to the same monthly bill. In real life, student debt pushes major life milestones further out of reach. People delay buying homes, starting families, saving for retirement not because they lack ambition, but because the numbers won't let them move. And while forgiveness programs might help ease the load, they don't solve the root issue. Because the problem isn't just the loan, it's the deep, structural wealth divide that determines who has to borrow in the first place, how much they borrow, and whether their degree can buy back the freedom it promised. For many Black immigrants, college isn't a fresh start. It's a costly detour with no clear destination, where the dream gets pulled backward by numbers that multiply not opportunity, but pressure. 5. Sky. High incarceration rates. Some numbers aren't meant to be read, they're meant to be felt, like a statistic that chills you even before you see the graph. The U.S. currently incarcerates nearly 2 million people, but what stops you cold isn't the scale of the system, it's the imbalance inside it. Black Americans make up just 14% of the population, but they account for 41% of those behind bars. That's not a gap, that's a structure. Many Black people say they don't have to commit a crime to feel the weight of surveillance. Being pulled over while driving legally, being followed in a store, being asked for ID while sitting in a public park. Being watched happens so often, it becomes part of the air tense, invisible, and impossible to push away. Studies show Black drivers are stopped by police more than twice as often as expected, even when accounting for location and behavior. And it's not just stops, it's searches, it's arrests, it's suspicion by default. In neighborhoods labeled marginal, Police aren't seen as protectors, they're a constant presence. And when society already carries an unspoken belief about who looks dangerous, random searches don't need justification, they feel pre-approved. Even in courtrooms, the disparity continues. It's not uncommon for two people charged with the same offense to receive drastically different sentences. Black defendants often getting 13% longer prison terms. Not because of the evidence, but because judges cite a higher risk of reoffending, a risk not measured by facts, but by a social instinct that's been trained in a stratified society. One of the most infamous examples of this double standard is the sentencing gap between crack and powdered cocaine. Both are forms of the same drug, but crack more common in poorer, Black communities was punished up to 100 times more harshly for decades. That ratio has been reduced to 18-1, but the stain of that policy still lingers in the justice system like an echo that refuses to fade. Some say higher incarceration is tied to higher crime caused by poverty, but even when you control for income, Black neighborhoods still experience higher rates of gun violence. That points to something deeper: segregation, underinvestment, and a loss of faith in any system that's supposed to serve you. In many Black communities, prison isn't an abstract concept, it's personal. It's the story of a cousin, a classmate, a neighbor, kids getting suspended for being too loud, schools calling the police instead of counselors. And when a child is let out of class in handcuffs, it's no longer about education, it's the first lock on a long chain we call the pipeline. Federal budget cuts have quietly made this worse. Many underfunded schools are now relying on law enforcement to keep order. It's a silent trade, one where understanding is replaced with punishment, and discipline becomes criminalization before a child can even vote. The American dream has long been sold as a land of opportunity. But for many Black immigrants, it feels more like a maze lined with barbed wire, where every choice carries the risk of being misunderstood, misjudged, or overpunished. And if freedom is supposed to be the foundation of the dream, then the criminal justice system is the place where that dream gets quietly dismantled. 6. Losing voting rights after a felony. Some ballots are never cast, not because people don't care about politics, but because there's a quiet system that builds fences around the polling booth with a small sign that reads, "Felony conviction." In many parts of America, a single criminal conviction is enough to cut off your right to vote. Not always forever, but often long enough. And when race and zip code quietly predict who's more likely to be convicted, the pattern becomes clear. For Black Americans, at least 1 in 16 has lost the right to vote. It's not a big number in the data tables, but it's alarmingly large when weighed against population size because it creates a silence that grows louder every election cycle. Many Black individuals share that losing the right to vote isn't just about paperwork, it's about the loss of recognition, the slow erasure of civic belonging. Being barred from choosing who makes the laws, while still being expected to follow them, leaves a very specific kind of wound. This disenfranchisement isn't incidental. It's tied directly to the disproportionate incarceration of Black communities. When Black Americans are sentenced at 5 to 6 times the rate of whites, the impact of felony disenfranchisement becomes structural. It's a modern version of the old Black codes, not written in slurs, but buried in policy and administrative procedures. Research shows that felony disenfranchisement lowers Black voter turnout by 5 to 10%. And in swing states, where elections can come down to a few thousand votes, that silence can tilt the scales. But no one counts the votes that never arrive. No one tallies the voices that were muted before they could speak. This isn't just a glitch in the system. It's a quiet dismantling of political power. The fewer who vote, the fewer who are represented. The fewer who are represented, the harder it is to pass reforms. And so the cycle continues where silence isn't a choice but a consequence. Reform efforts have helped restore voting rights to over 2 million people since the late 1992. But even among those newly eligible, many never learn their rights have been returned. The restoration doesn't come with a notice. It comes in silence, easily missed by those who have grown used to being ignored. Some proposals call for automatic restoration of voting rights and consistent federal standards, but they face resistance from voices claiming to protect public trust. What often goes unspoken is that this trust is eroded every time someone is cast out of civic life by a conviction and then locked out of the very process that could change the system. 7. Alarmingly high maternal death rates. Some deaths should never happen, not because they're shocking, but because they're preventable if the healthcare system treated everyone equally. But for many Black immigrant women, giving birth in America isn't just a journey into motherhood. It's a quiet gamble with mortality. It's not uncommon to hear stories of Black women crying out in pain after delivery, only to be brushed off by medical staff. Diagnosed too late, medicated too late, transferred too late. And when life begins to slip away, their final words aren't for the baby, but for the doctor. Pleading, panicked, powerless. But by then, it's already too late. The maternal mortality rate for Black women is 3 to 4 times higher than for white women. But what's more disturbing is this. That gap doesn't shrink with income or education. Because the problem isn't just where you live or how much you earn, it's how the system chooses to hear or not hear your voice. Many Black women say that when they describe symptoms, their words are met with skepticism. Pain is dismissed as exaggeration. Anxiety is brushed off as oversensitivity. Early surgeries are delayed. Critical monitoring is skipped. Medical decisions aren't just guided by charts, they're shaped by quiet assumptions about how strong, how tolerant, or how trustworthy a Black woman is. Even during pregnancy, access to proper care is harder to come by. Black women are 25% less likely to receive adequate prenatal attention. Not because they don't seek it, but because the nearest clinics are closed, the funding's been cut, or appointments are denied until it's too late. And when postpartum complications arise, too many women have nowhere to return for follow-up care. Even when everything is done right, the body still responds differently. Because racism doesn't just live in policy, it lives in cortisol. Constant stress, the feeling of being watched or questioned at every turn, triggers low-level inflammation that wears the body down over time. This is what researchers call weathering, a kind of biological aging caused by the chronic toll of racial injustice. It's no coincidence that even insured Black women, delivering in top hospitals, still don't always come home. One reason lies in the absence of providers who understand them. Only 5 to 6% of American doctors are Black. When there's no cultural connection, no shared understanding, risk increases. And it's not just a feeling. Studies show that when Black patients are treated by Black doctors, maternal mortality drops by 19 to 39%. Maternal death isn't just a cold medical outcome. It's one of the clearest signs of who gets to live and who is left behind. And for many Black immigrant women, the dream of motherhood in America comes with a cost no one should ever have to pay, not in any country that calls itself civilized. 8. Double the poverty rate. Some numbers don't just measure income, they measure exhaustion, repeated, inherited, quietly cemented across generations. For many Black immigrants, poverty isn't a phase, it's the backdrop, built not from laziness, but from costs that can't be negotiated and opportunities that always arrive too late. The poverty rate in Black communities is twice that of white communities. But the real story isn't in the difference, it's in the design. When the median wealth of a Black household is just 1/8 that of a white household, one missed paycheck can be the difference between survival and collapse. And there's no cushion to catch the fall. Many Black Americans say they're not poor because they don't budget, but because there's nothing left to save. When 30 to 40% of your income goes toward rent and debt in neighborhoods that are isolated, overpriced, and under-resourced, every dollar carries the scent of anxiety. And when you can't save, you can't invest. When you can't invest, you stay stuck watching the world move without you. Work doesn't offer much relief either. It's not rare for job applications to vanish into silence, especially when your name isn't neutral enough. It's not about being less qualified. It's about being less invited. And even if you do get in, the paycheck is often 20 to 30% smaller than your coworkers. That's assuming you don't have a record. If you do, your odds of falling into poverty rise by 50% because the job market rarely forgives, and even more rarely opens up to Black workers. The structural traps don't stop there. Underfunded schools, low homeownership, unequal health care. Each of these isn't a standalone injustice, they're interconnected leaks in a system that was never designed to hold equity. One weak link pulls down the next, until poverty becomes not a failure, but a pattern. It's not unusual to find 3 generations of a Black family living in the same neighborhood, earning the same wages, worrying the same worries. Not for lack of ambition, but for lack of access. People often say, if you're born poor, study hard and you can change your life. But what if your school is rated failing, your home has no equity, and your healthcare is delayed until it's too late? Then, changing your life becomes less of a journey and more of an impossibility. The poverty rate in Black communities isn't just a statistic. It's proof that the system isn't broken in one place, it's leaking from all sides. And if the American dream was once painted in the language of opportunity, today, for many Black immigrants, it's being framed by costs they can't afford, not just in dollars, but in time, health, and the quiet erosion of hope. 9. Unequal access to healthcare. There's a kind of pain that doesn't come from illness, it comes from not being believed. Many Black immigrants say they've grown used to doctors looking at them with quiet suspicion, as if their symptoms need to be double-checked and weighed before they're considered real. In a world of high-tech monitors and biometric scans, it's still common for Black patients to have to convince someone that their suffering deserves attention. The numbers show that Black Americans are significantly more likely to be uninsured, but that's just the surface. Beneath it lies a system laced with gaps that are anything but random. Many Black neighborhoods have far fewer clinics, and the nearest hospitals are often miles farther than those in white communities. That means relying more on emergency rooms, places that are fast, impersonal, and often too late. It's not unusual for Black patients to receive less pain medication than white patients with the same symptoms. Not because they need less care, but because there's an unspoken belief that they can tough it out. Some even get steered toward less aggressive treatment paths, not for medical reasons, but due to outdated stereotypes. And if that sounds like history, not the present, there's still data showing Black patients face higher mortality rates in emergency departments, even when their vital signs are just as critical. There's another layer to this: distrust. Many Black families grow up hearing cautionary tales about medical mistreatment, and sadly, those stories aren't just folklore. The trauma of experiments like the Tuskegee study hasn't faded, it lingers in the collective memory. That's why lower rates of vaccination, early screening, or preventive care in Black communities aren't always due to lack of awareness. They're often rooted in a deep and justified fear that hasn't been healed. Implicit bias training is being introduced in some healthcare settings, but mostly as an option, not a requirement. And when reform is treated as a courtesy instead of a responsibility, the result is more misdiagnoses, more dismissed pain, more lives cut short not by illness, but by indifference. In the American dream, access to healthcare is supposed to be a basic right, not a game of luck. But for many Black immigrants, the journey to the nearest clinic can feel longer, more uncertain, and far lonelier than the journey that brought them to this country in the first place. 10. Lack of representation in leadership. There's a kind of absence that makes no noise but echoes across generations. The absence from decision-making tables. In boardrooms where language becomes policy, where numbers turn into budgets, where power passes from hand to hand, many Black immigrants realize they're present only as data points, not as decision-makers. Many have shared that they've grown used to working near the centers of power, yet never being allowed inside. Despite making up roughly 14% of the population, Black people hold only 3–5% of top executive roles in major corporations, and that figure drops even lower when you consider Black immigrants from Africa or the Caribbean. In Congress, on university faculties, and in city councils, representation remains halfway, just enough to check a box, but not enough to shift policy. The issue isn't just about the outcome, it begins at the starting line. When schools in predominantly Black neighborhoods are chronically underfunded, when internships and scholarships are often handed out through unspoken connections, the road from potential to influence is simply longer for Black talent. The barriers in the so-called pipeline, the invisible system that filters who gets to rise, mean many never make it to the places where real change happens. It's not uncommon to see Black candidates evaluated lower despite matching credentials. Some say they have to work 3 times as hard just to be seen as equal. Even the tools we rely on for fairness, automated screenings, AI evaluations, often end up replicating the biases embedded in the old data they were trained on. When the past carries prejudice, the future gets coded with it. And when DEI programs are rolled back under the banner of neutrality, the underrepresentation stops looking like coincidence and starts to feel like a quiet refusal. When no one who looks like you is in the room, policies, whether intentional or not, rarely include you. The truth is, organizations with diverse leadership tend to perform better, innovate faster, and see further not just because of racial variety, but because different life experiences bring radically different perspectives. But that kind of leadership only happens when Black voices aren't kept outside the rooms where power lives. And if you've made it this far, maybe you felt it too. The American dream doesn't collapse with a bang. It doesn't shatter overnight or because of a single law. It erodes slowly, quietly, with every cold stare at a job interview, with every asylum application denied without reason, with the silence echoing in rooms where no one speaks for you. Many Black immigrants still believe in that dream, not out of naivete, but because they don't have the luxury to let go. But maybe the real question isn't whether to keep believing. It's this: if a dream only works for some people, is it still a dream for all? This video isn't about blame. It's not here to stir outrage. It's here to look at the systems that shape our everyday lives, the policies we don't notice, the questions we stop asking, the normal that quietly tells millions they don't belong. If what you just watched made you pause, share it. Share it with someone who still believes that hard work alone is the answer. Because sometimes the hardest work is facing the truth. And if you want more content that pulls back the curtain on these hidden realities, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We're here to tell the stories no one wants to say out loud, but someone needs to hear.